Welcome back to Moments That Matter, and welcome 2022 and all the hopes that come with you. We do hope it's a better year, and if I may be as bold as to deviate from our usual opening script, today we have a number of reasons to celebrate, one of them being the start of our 5th season. All the way back at the end of December in 2019, in a world ignorant of a coming pandemic, we started with our first episode, and here we are kicking off season 5. And it truly has been a great deal of fun, and we dare not pass it over with at least a nod of recognition. Additionally, yesterday signaled a new book launch from our very own Dr. Paul Schatzberger. In yet another divine delivery, Paul has graced his audiences with a truly blessed work, affectionately titled A Love Letter to Twentysomethings Everywhere. Today, we want to take a chance to hear about the newest work from the Schatzberger Library and chat about some of the elements behind the scenes. It's an honor yet again to welcome our intrepid pro-host, Dr. Paul Schatzberger. Greetings and salutations to you.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Great to be here as always.
Paul, last time we sat here talking about an inspiration for yet another book, and the idea for that one came to you in the quiet of night. Regarding this love letter, your newest book, take us back to the beginning. What gripped you about the topics you wrote about, and what was your inspiration for writing?
Well, first I have to tell you that I have a folder on my computer that is titled Book Ideas, and I've had that for years. And ever before I had a book, I just jotted down some thoughts and things that I thought might be relevant for people, whatever it might be. And this one was under the title, The Day I Grew Up. And it was just a collection of stories. That's all it was. And the idea being that there are these moments that matter, that come along that allow us to grow up as opposed to simply hitting some chronological age. And growing up also not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and the spiritual sense. So that's about all I had for a while, looking kind of for the thread, that kind of ties everything together. And as I thought about, okay, this might actually turn into a book. So I really want a theme. And the theme seemed to be the promises of God. Because those had been very influential in my life. So then the title became something like, The Day I Grew Up in Promises or something like that. Anyway, and so then I worked a little bit on it, and there was a Christian Writers Conference this past spring in 2021. And part of that conference was you could have an editor look at a manuscript and give you some suggestions. And, I knew that I wanted to address this to people who were facing these kinds of life decisions, and, bring some hope and, like I said, based on all these promises. But I didn't have a real strong sense of writing to the audience. I was just writing sort of for the audience, if you will. And she read this and she said, you know what, you really need to directly address this to your 20-something audience. And so rather than talking about them, talk to them. And that was a huge change for the book. And then pretty much everything else just kind of fell in place after that.
Well, you perfectly segue to my next question. There in the title, the book specifies 20-somethings, but my guess is that this book's not limited to this certain population. In fact, when I read it, I felt like it was written to me. What would you say that label refers to?
Well, technically, it refers to kind of late millennial and early Gen Z. And in particular, those who are in college and are just post-college now. So, I mean, truly it is for 20-somethings, but there's obviously a lot of spillover. And part of the reason for the spillover is exactly the subtitle, which is Yes, You Can Adult, because that has become such a thing for the millennials and Gen Z, that this whole coming of age, if you will, and making these very big decisions, about getting married, having children, having a career, et cetera, are kind of being pushed off. And so, whereas, I don't know, 50 years ago or something like that, I would have only been talking to 20 somethings about these kinds of things. Now it's really 20 somethings, a little bit of 30 somethings, and I hate to go, beyond that. But anyway, so the 20 something is certainly the intended audience, but I want this to be inclusive. And in fact, there's a chapter in there that's called, You're Never Too Young or Too Old. And the never too young part is pretty obvious for the book, about growing up and when you're on the younger side. But then the never too old is about me in my 60s, So I think, as you said, people will find something in there for them. And if not for them, then potentially for, a child, a grandchild, that sort of thing.
That's great. And I love that subtitle. Yes, you can adult. And I love the focus on can because it's not just an option, but it is a possibility. I remember some time ago reading an article about delayed adolescence, especially in this sort of subculture that you describe. And I recall earlier generations, including when I was younger, hearing about the greatest generation and how they grew up too quickly. And now it almost seems like we have people who grow up too slowly. What would you say may be a factor in that, or what have you recognized in your expertise and in time working with sort of this population group?
Well, Gen X, is kind of sandwiched between the boomers and the millennials. And that was the first generation where the average Gen X is potentially at least making less than their parents. And it seems like in some ways that pattern has continued. It's been very hard, even, as good as the economy has been for a long time, certainly since the 90s, with, of course, the downturn in 2008. But generally speaking, it's been kind of, booming along. But the buying potential and the career potential, the growth in the salaries and that sort of thing has just not really kept pace. And it's also, it seems, quite a bit harder to go through college without incurring debt. And so we just have a lot of tugs and pulls. And as I say in the book, that I think that these generations now, especially Gen Z, are just not convinced that the whole thing's worth it. That whole growing up thing and adulting thing, and what's in it for me, that kind of thing. And it's just a lot to deal with. And so, not saying, that everybody's then gone back to live with their parents and, that sort of thing, but it has become much more common. And so it's like, in looking at this and again, realizing that a lot of the people that I have any kind of interaction with on a day-to-day basis are from this group. What is the hope then? Where is the hope? Is there hope for adulting and growing up and that sort of thing that maybe has not as much to do with finances and worldly things as it might do with spiritual things, and kind of the stealing of the soul by the spirit in order to get these things done despite the obstacles.
Yeah, well said. Sort of building on that, having known you now for some years and recognizing many areas of your giftings, you've always had, I feel like, a really special connection to this population. You're a great cultural communicator, and you always seem to have your finger on the pulse of this demographic. So, what is it that you think draws you to this specific stage of life for those that you have had such a great influence on?
Um, well, I should, I guess, start out by saying that, when I began my teaching career, I was teaching high school students, and that was exactly where I wanted to be. That was exactly the age group that I wanted to deal with. What I discovered, though, is that that is not for everybody for all time. It requires a great deal of energy to be able to keep up with them and to still find them funny and engaging and that kind of thing. So I did that for 7 years, and then I got my doctorate, and I've been, dealing with college age folk pretty much ever since. With the exception of Ukraine, I was dealing more with adult education, but so it's been quite a few years, 30 or so, and that just seems to be where I've kind of settled in. Although uh, not just undergraduate, also graduate. And so I am dealing with people who are older, with 30 something, 40 something, even a little bit older. Um, and that's been really great. It's been, as I've gotten older, you know, some of the students have gotten older, and that has its own rewards. But the undergraduates are always the ones, and then postgraduate, like right after, are always the ones that keep the energy up and keep me interested in education. Um, and I just find their openness, especially in college, to to everything, but especially to what God has for them, is very refreshing. And so I really, really enjoy mentoring um, students and then post college folk. And I love, like, marriage counseling as an example. People are getting ready to be married, and then just keeping up with people as they get older. So it's just a lot of interaction with that age group, and thinking about what do these people really need from me, and uh, also thinking back on the mentoring, and you know where have we settled in and said this is something that we really need to talk about, you know and usually it has to do with refining goals and discovering motivations, including spiritual giftings. um, and then uh, often I will discover that there is kind of an empty place as far as their understanding of scripture. Um, and so one of the things I've also done over many years with this age group is just take them through some of the major passages, and in included in that are the promises that I make reference to in the book, and and the hope is that this will become then a source of light and wisdom for them long after I'm gone from their life. And so the book is some attempt to kind of distill all of that down.
Regarding those of whom you speak in this age group, I did notice, and we've talked about how meaningful it was to have a former student, Hannah Selden, to write the foreword for the book. What went on behind the scenes, getting in communication with her and getting her involved in this project?
Well, that was actually a lot of fun. I was thinking about a forward, for a long time, um, and I think it's important because it gives kind of motivation for the book. Um, and then I thought, well, I can't hardly get anybody to do a forward who's not a 20 something. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So then I thought, well, I need a 20 something who I have some kind of relationship with, but who also can write. And then Hannah was the one that was the obvious choice. I'd known her since first semester, freshman year, and she was in a discipleship group with Bob Black and me. And we called it Inklings 2, TOO. And we all just brought our writings into the group and we read to each other and we got feedback from each other and mostly encouragement, from each other. And so basically I knew her whole career. She just graduated in May, and she was just, and we had talked quite a bit about writing. So she was just a natural choice.
That's great, and that flowed very well, her forward and the words that you both shared. Kind of in the air of Moments That Matter, your first book, and then maybe more so in Choices, and especially here, I'm sure as you wrote about your experiences, there was a sort of a process of reliving those elements where the Lord had sort of intervened, or you saw Him in a bigger way. What range of emotions did you experience while walking back through some of those areas where God radically revealed Himself in your life in times before?
Well, God has kind of gifted me in that way, and I don't really understand how it works, but basically, I am able to recall what I need to recall when I need to recall it, and then I can just drop it and move on. And that's really good because, I mean, some of the things that I talked about are either embarrassing or painful or whatever it might be. But it's not like I'm just kind of wallowing in that. It's brought to me, I believe, by God, into my memory for a purpose, and I get the details down. And in some cases, I get some help in the details. I for Moments That Matter, there was one story that I was going through a box of stuff, and I found something I had written about that event at the moment, like right after it had happened. And so that helped, kind of generate, oh yeah, okay, the details and that kind of thing. And God just does that for me. He will remind me about, very specific situations, and then we'll just kind of move on. And I appreciate that about Him, because He's given me enough of a memory that I can, pull up these stories and ideas, but not too much that I just am bound by them, which I think unfortunately is the case for some people. And so as much as I'd love to have a better memory, sometimes I think it's actually a good thing that I don't.
Well, I couldn't help but notice, and I love the stories that you included because so many contain elements that I think we all experience and feel in some way, shape, or form. So perhaps we could delve into the book a little bit. I really was struck by your early stories of bullying through school, and I think we all find a certain reading of ourselves into those sort of situations, and our own experiences in bullying. And you had some really significant ones. But no story was really quite as compelling as that amazing tale of reconciliation as you were entering your fourth semester of German there in college. Share with us, if you would, a few highlights from that encounter and really the incredible transformation of a student in which you played a big catalyst in that sort of shift of his life.
Well, this is a dear friend, as it turns out, who began as my tormentor in German class. And I have to say, as I say in the book, that I'm terrible with language. And so it's one thing when you're in the first semester of a language or the second semester of language, but once you hit about the third semester, it's very serious. And in this case, it was third semester German, and we were critiquing plays in German, no English, and it was just so incredibly difficult. Well, it wasn't difficult for everyone. And one of the people it was not difficult for was Ashley. And um, he was just marvelous at German. And so he just found the greatest pleasure in my stumbling and fumbling. And he just took every opportunity to laugh and deride and, everything else like this. Nothing uh, terribly overt, but it was just constant. And so, this goes on for a semester, and semester in college, when you're in college, feels like a long time. Um, and it was nothing that I ever looked forward to with that class. And the professor was blithely unaware of what was happening. And so, anyway, the thing that I was impressed with throughout the semester was that I really was not supposed to respond except to just smile. And so there were many things I could have done, but I didn't, praise God. And so just kind of took it. And then we finished the semester, and I was, singing Hallelujah to be done with that, and went off to break and came back from break. And another dear friend found me and was just breathlessly telling me that this guy Ashley had become a Christian over the break. And as I relate in the book, I felt like Ananias when God told him to go minister to Saul of Tarsus, and he said, you mean the Christian hater? It was kind of like that for me. And so this other friend, um, did the great service of getting us both together to talk about this. And Ashley's story was wonderful, but part of his story, as it turns out, was me in my response to him. And that was the thing that said to him, well, maybe this Christianity thing is real, But as I relate in the book, that would be a wonderful story right there. But it just goes on and on because that time that I found out about Ashley and him being saved, I had just become president of a chapter of InterVarsity at Chapel Hill, and that was for a year. It started in January, finished in December, and my successor in that position was Ashley. And God, grew him up really quickly, and he was a mature leader, and it was just an amazing thing because I didn't know honestly who was going to take over for me. But he was raring to go in the middle of junior year, and so that would be a great story. But then, because of a not great rooming situation in senior year, my second semester, I was looking for a roommate, and so was Ashley. And so we wound up rooming together for a semester, and that was a great, great semester. And at the end of that semester, at the time of graduation, I proposed to the woman who would be my wife, and I thought about, well, who could be my best man, and the only choice was Ashley. And so it was really quite wonderful what God did for me back then, in that situation I was in, but then how he is not just one who redeems, but he is the redeemer. That's his thing. It is who he is, and his creative ways of redeeming are just absolutely wonderful. I will also add, we've had Rain Riley on this show talking about her communications degree and that she got, and her, marketing and that sort of thing. We were talking one day when she was still in college, and she happened to mention somebody named Ashley, And I said, well, I don't know many guys that are named Ashley. Um, I knew an Ashley Woodowis in North Carolina. She said, well, that's the same guy, and I was like, how in the world do you know? Well, he was a neighbor of hers in Greenwood in South Carolina. And so she had grown up with his family, with his children. And I was just like, how is this happening right now? Anyway, because of her, we all wound up attending a soccer game together in Charlotte, and it was just wonderful to see Ashley after all those years. And I don't know, just to feel those feelings all over again. So God is more than good. He's more than gracious, and I've just been very, very blessed with how He has redeemed things over and over again in my life.
I think that was one of my favorite stories of exactly what you say, redemption, of how something that started a bit rocky turned into such a beautiful sort of kingdom setup that would last far beyond just those college years. And that was one of my favorites. And I love it continues even to today. Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.